President has been in office for 3 years. What has he done, other than dodging the darts of media and fighting Pelosi from having the throne? What have President Trump and his Patriots squad accomplished? Here you go. Trump recently signed 3 bills to benefit Native people. One gives compensation to the Spokane tribe for loss of their lands in the mid-1900s, one funds native language programs, and the third gives federal recognition to the Little Shell tribe of Chippewa Indians in Montana. Trump finalized the creation of Space Force as our 6th military branch. Trump signed a law to make cruelty to animals a federal felony so that animal abusers face tougher consequences. Violent crime has fallen every year he's been in office after rising during the 2 years before he was elected. Mr. President Trump signed a bill making CBD and hemp legal. President Trump's EPA gave $100 million to fix the water infrastructure problem in Flint, Michigan. President Trump signed a law ending the gag orders on pharmacists that prevented them from sharing money-saving information. Trump signed a bill to require airports to provide spaces for breastfeeding moms. The 25% lowest-paid Americans enjoyed a 4.5% income boost in November 2019, which outpaces a 2.9% gain in earnings for the country's highest-paid workers. Low-wage workers are benefiting from higher minimum wages and from corporations that are increasing entry-level pay. Trump signed the biggest wilderness protection and conservation bill in a decade and designated 375,000 acres as protected land. Trump signed the Save Our Seas Act, which funds $10 million per year to clean tons of plastic and garbage from the ocean. He signed a bill this year allowing some drug imports from Canada so that prescription prices would go down. Trump signed an executive order this year that forces all healthcare providers to disclose the cost of their services so that Americans can comparison shop and know how much less providers charge insurance companies. When signing that bill, he said no American should be blindsided by bills for medical services they never agreed to in advance. Hospitals will now be required to post their standard charges for services, which include the discounted price a hospital is willing to accept. In the 8 years prior to President Trump's inauguration, prescription drug prices increased by an average of 3.6% per year. Under Trump, drug prices have seen year-over-year declines in 9 of the last 10 months, with a 1.1% drop as of the most recent month. He created a White House Veterans Affairs hotline to help veterans and principally staffed it with veterans and direct family members of veterans. Issued an executive order requiring the Secretaries of Defense, Homeland Security, and Veterans Affairs to submit a joint plan to provide veterans access to mental health treatment as they transition to civilian life. Because of a bill signed and championed by Trump, in 2020, most federal employees will see their pay increase by an average of 3.1%, the largest raise in more than 10 years. Trump signed into a law up to 12 weeks of paid parental leave for millions of federal workers. Trump administration will provide HIV prevention drugs for free to 200,000 uninsured patients per year for 11 years. Trump signed an order allowing small businesses to group together when buying insurance to get a better price. President Trump signed the Preventing Maternal Deaths Act that provides funding for states to develop maternal mortality reviews to better understand maternal complications and identify solutions, and largely focuses on reducing the higher mortality rates for Black Americans. In 2018, President Trump signed the groundbreaking First Step Act, a criminal justice bill which enacted reforms that make our justice system fairer and help former inmates successfully return to society. The First Step Act's reforms addressed inequities in sentencing laws that disproportionately harmed Black Americans and reformed mandatory minimums that created unfair outcomes. The First Step Act expanded judicial discretion in sentencing of nonviolent crimes. Over 90% of those benefiting from the retroactive sentencing reductions in the First Step Act are Black Americans. The First Step Act provides rehabilitative programs to inmates, helping them successfully rejoin society and not return to crime. Trump increased funding for historically Black colleges and universities by more than 14%. Trump signed legislation forgiving Hurricane Katrina debt that threatened historically Black colleges and universities. New single-family home sales are up 31.6% in October 2019 compared to just 1 year ago. Made historically black colleges and universities a priority by creating the position of Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Trump received the Bipartisan Justice Award at a historically black college for his criminal justice reform accomplishments. The poverty rate fell to a 17-year low of 11.8% under the Trump administration as a result of a jobs-rich environment. Poverty rates for African Americans and Hispanic Americans have reached their lowest levels since the U.S. began collecting such data. President Trump signed a bill that creates 5 national monuments, expands several national parks, adds 1.3 million acres of wilderness, and permanently reauthorizes the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Trump's USDA committed $124 million to rebuild rural water infrastructure. Consumer confidence and small business confidence is at an all-time high. More than 7 million jobs created since election. More Americans are now employed than ever recorded before in our history. More than 400,000 manufacturing jobs created since his election. Through Trump's Anti-Trafficking Coordination Team initiative, federal law enforcement more than doubled convictions of human traffickers and increased the number of defendants charged by 75% in anti-trafficking coordination team districts. Trump's Department of Health and Human Services provided funding to support the National Human Trafficking Hotline to identify perpetrators and give victims the help they need. President Trump has called on Congress to pass school choice legislation so that no child is trapped in a failing school because of his or her zip code. The president signed funding legislation in September 2018 that increased funding for school choice by $42 million. The tax cuts signed into law by President Trump promote school choice by allowing families to use 529 college savings plans for elementary and secondary education. Executive order expanding apprenticeship opportunities for students and workers. Trump issued an executive order prohibiting the U.S. government from discriminating against Christians or punishing expressions of faith. President Trump ordered a halt to U.S. tax money going to international organizations that fund or perform abortions. Made a deal with the European Union to increase U.S. energy exports to Europe. Secured $250 billion in new trade and investment deals in China and $12 billion in Vietnam. Trump signed the Music Modernization Act, the biggest change to copyright law in decades. Trump secured billions that will fund the building of a wall at our southern border. The Trump administration is promoting second chance hiring to give former inmates the opportunity to live crime-free lives and find meaningful employment. Trump's DOJ and the Board of Prisons launched a new Ready to Work initiative to help connect employers directly with former prisoners. President Trump's historic tax cut legislation included new Opportunity Zone incentives to promote investment in low-income communities across the country. 8,764 communities across the country have been designated as Opportunity Zones. Opportunity zones are expected to spur $100 billion in long-term private capital investment in economically distressed communities across the country. Trump signed the 9/11 Victims' Compensation Fund into law. Trump signed measure funding prevention programs for veteran suicide. Companies have brought back over $1 trillion from overseas because of the TCJA bill that Trump signed. Manufacturing jobs are growing at the fastest rate in more than 30 years. Stock market has reached record highs. Median household income has hit highest level ever recorded. African American unemployment is at an all-time low. Hispanic American unemployment is at an all-time low. Asian American unemployment is at an all-time low. Women's unemployment rate is at a 65-year low. Youth unemployment is at a 50-year low. We have the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded. The pledge to America's workers has resulted in employers committing to train more than 4 million Americans. 95% of U.S. manufacturers are optimistic about the future, the highest ever. As a result of the Republican tax bill, small businesses will have the lowest top marginal tax rate in more than 80 years. Record number of regulations eliminated that hurt small businesses. Signed welfare reform requiring able-bodied adults who don't have children to work or look for work if they're on welfare. Under Trump, the FDA approved more affordable generic drugs than ever before in history. Reformed Medicare program to stop hospitals from overcharging low-income seniors on their drugs, saving seniors hundreds of millions of dollars this year alone. Signed right to try legislation allowing terminally ill patients to try experimental treatment that wasn't allowed before. Secured $6 billion in new funding to fight the opioid epidemic. The U.S. is a net natural gas exporter for the first time since 1957. Withdrew the United States from the job-killing Paris Climate Accord in 2017, and that same year the U.S. still led the world by having the largest reduction in carbon emissions. Has his circuit court judge nominees being confirmed faster than any other new administration. Agreed to a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada that will increase jobs here and dollars coming in. Imposed tariffs on China in response to China's forced technology transfer, intellectual property theft, and their chronically abusive trade practices, has agreed to a Part 1 trade deal with China. In 2018, President Trump signed into law a $2.4 billion funding increase for the Child Care and Development Fund, providing a total of $8.1 billion to states to fund child care for low-income families. The Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit signed into law by Trump provides a tax credit equal to 20 to 35% of child care expenses, $3,000 per child and $6,000 per family, plus flexible spending accounts allow you to set aside up to $5,000 in pre-tax to use for child care. In 2019, President Donald Trump signed the Autism Collaboration, Accountability, Research, Education and Support Act into law, which allocates $1.8 billion in funding over the next 5 years to help people with autism spectrum disorder and to help their families. In 2019, President Trump signed into law 2 funding packages providing nearly $19 million in new funding for lupus-specific research and education programs, as well as an additional $41.7 billion in funding for the National Institutes of Health, the most lupus funding ever. U.S. stock market continually hits all-time record highs. Trump did all of this while fighting flagrant abuse and impeachment charges. Please explain to me why you have a problem with our president? Because he has misspoke a few times? Tell me when you find a perfect person, please. I'll tell you why. Because the media has skewed him in such a negative light and unfairly report his accomplishments to undermine those achievements. Why? Because the media is complicit in every single thing this man is trying to undo. Start thinking for yourself.